How can we address the educational inequality worldwide? This is the Leaders of Transformation podcast. And on this show, we interview difference makers and world changers who are disrupting for good. I'm your host, Nicole Jansen, and our guest today is Rebecca Chandler Leege. Rebecca is the Chief Impact Officer at WorldReader, which is a nonprofit organization that has reached over 20 million readers in the past decade and is set up to reach the next 200 million kids with their powerful technology tools. With over 20 years of leadership experience, Rebecca previously actually led an education technology initiative of USAID, World Vision, and the Australian government. And she has spent 15 years living and working throughout Africa and Asia. She has a tremendous amount of experience that she brings to the table here. And today, we're going to talk about WorldReader, their technology solution for scaling literacy, how they reach underserved communities, how they choose their curriculum, engage families, raise funds, a lot of good things here today. Now, before we dive in, I do want to do a shout out to the team at Momentum Communications Group for introducing us to Rebecca. I always like to acknowledge those that support our show. So thank you to the team there. We really appreciate you. And one last thing is this podcast is brought to you by my training and coaching company, which is the Leaders of Transformation. And if you are a leader who wants to be better, do better, make a greater impact in the world, then I have a free gift for you. You can book a free consult with me. You can go to the website, which is leadersoftransformation.com/coaching, and you can book a free consult with me. We'll talk about your goals, your objectives, the challenges you might be facing, and how we can get you from where you are to where you want to be as a leader and difference maker in the world. So you can take advantage of that at that scheduling link. And let's bring our guest on here today. Rebecca, welcome to the Leaders of Transformation.
Thanks, Nicole. It's great to be with you.
It's great to have you. Now, how did you first become interested in global literacy and this solving this major issue?
That is a great question, and I think it began very early on in my life, actually as a kid growing up in Senegal, West Africa, and just being exposed to general inequalities, but also the beauty of the world around. As I advanced my own career and thinking, I became quite involved and passionate about human trafficking issues and how to rectify them and really stop a lot of the human trafficking, both in the United States and globally. And at the foundation of a lot of that is education, really enabling people to understand what they are getting themselves into. In many cases, they're illiterate, and what grounds education but reading. And it really became a passion of mine over the last 15 years is to figure out how can we move the needle on reading for young children, because it is life-changing. We know it gives better health outcomes, it gives more economic opportunities. And I think, Nicole, you'll have seen, and many listening today will have recognized all the statistics that are coming out as a result of COVID and how much learning loss we've had over the last couple of years is setting us back decades. And the implications for us, if we don't address it as leaders today, is significant. So passionate, very passionate. I think every day, how can I move the needle on getting one more child and their families reading together, because I know it's going to make a big difference in their life in the long term.
Now, you talk about every day having that thought in your mind, and I think that's so important. This is a little side note for difference makers, world changers. They literally think about this every single day. And so, I love that you made a mention of that, because I talk a lot about with clients and saying, like, what are you focusing on? And I challenge myself every day. It's like, what am I focusing on? It's not about just surviving, getting through the day, getting done a certain amount of tasks. It's literally being purpose driven in that.
So true.
And you're talking about doing that every day. And so you mentioned about human trafficking and illiteracy, and even during this whole time of COVID, it's wonderful that we have all this technology, and social media opens up this world, the internet, of course, but even social media opens up this world to information. And yet, how is it possible that so many children around the world are illiterate? And actually not just children, but of course adults that grow up and they're illiterate. And it's like, wow, that's extraordinary with all of the information that is
Mm,
available. And so I know that you use technology in a way to scale, and one of the myths out there is that it's not scalable. So talk a little bit about the premise of WorldReader, how they're doing it, and maybe
sure.
how they're even doing it differently than
Mhm.
others have done it before.
Began in 2010, and it really was a pioneer to um, integrate digital reading into low resource contexts that really had no ability to access technology, and more importantly, to reduce the barriers of content. You know, if you are in a low resource home, Nicole, you may have never had a book in your house, and imagine all of a sudden on a device you can have hundreds of books. So digital becomes a game changer in terms of how you can get the right content into the hands of kids and families that need that exposure. So digital can play a real powerful tool for good. But you know, there's a lot of parameters you got to put around that good to make sure it's used accordingly. I would say in terms of WorldReader and our mission and impact, it's really about how do we bring carers, parents, caregivers, families together early on in a child's life to begin that reading journey. So we target children ages 3 to 8. That's part of our revitalized strategy, I would say, to start earlier in a child's life. Because at 3, you need someone that can read or someone that can story tell to that child, and to begin exposing them. And the way that they can get exposed to vocabulary words, concepts, ideas, just the whole fun of storytelling is really through access to a diverse set of content. But we know that alone isn't enough. You got to be able to take that parent, that caregiver on a journey with that child. And that journey, as long as we can keep them going and getting books read and completed and understood, we know we're going to begin moving the needle on literacy. It's so critical that they have grounded early on in their childhood that exposure and that desire to hear more and more, because that lays the foundation for all the great instruction that schools are doing today or they're receiving in preschools, etc.
You know, it's like what you're talking about, it's systemic. And I think about sometimes we in the Western world, especially, but certainly the developed world, we understand the value of education. We understand the value of a book, and we
Hmm.
know what it means. And you're talking about it here. It's hard sometimes to get into the mind of a person and or a family that has never had that experience. And it's
Hmm.
like you hand them a book and go like, here, there you go. And they're like,
Sure.
what is this? And why should I be excited about it? I think about a few years back, somebody reached out to me and was asking for some money for some things that they wanted to do. One of the things they wanted to do is give um they wanted to do some things for the kids in their village. And he came back and he didn't actually use the money for what he said he was going to use, was shoes. He used it for these notebooks. And he said, here, like we got them all these notebooks. And I said, great, did you give them a pencil? Like what,
Hmm.
because he was all excited about, here, I'm doing
Sure.
something. But
Right.
unless you help them understand how to use that tool,
Hmm.
it's not really that valuable. And then later on, he was talking about Bibles and giving Bibles out. And I said, well, how about you take a Bible and read it to them? Like
Sure.
bring it to life. And so,
Hmm.
you're talking about that, this idea of storytelling, the idea of capturing
Hmm.
their attention and even instilling in them this yearn to learn, this yearn to use this tool that is
Right.
really foreign to them because they've not
Hmm.
experienced that. And so it's very interesting when you think about parents who wouldn't want their child to be educated, but if you weren't educated yourself, how would you know that? So
Yeah.
you're breaking down some barriers, you're breaking down
Hmm.
some maybe some belief systems, ingrained habits. So it's more than just handing them a
It
reader.
is definitely more than handing them a reader. I think you make a really interesting point there, and that's something we think about regularly as World Reader is how do we um, change that behavior or build that confidence. I don't even think it's behavior. It's building that confidence of a parent to know that they can engage in this way if they haven't had it modeled for them. I fundamentally believe that there's not a parent out there that doesn't want good for their children, right? They really do. They want them to be educated. I think some parents have longer vision and a better understanding of what that future could be. And I think giving them tools and support to envision what that future is for their child also gives them motivation to engage in a new habit, a new way of interacting with their children. Really love part of WorldReader's approach is that we always work with partners. And you were saying, it's not just about giving them access to content right on the phone that they currently own anytime that they can access it, whether they're sitting on a bus or they're at home, etc. But it's really the type of partners we work with too, Nicole, and we work across spectrum. We work with those in the affordable housing sector, we work in the health sector, we work in education or library systems, etc. And the reason we do that is because we know families and caregivers need people to support them that know that they trust, right? It's not just something that they download and we wish them well, but we really do want those partners to come around and support them on that journey. And that makes a world of difference, right? You trust the next mom that told you this is the right thing to do, or the person that's always has your back to see the advance for your child. So that's our operation model, is always to work with partners. That's partly how we scale. Not only does technology allow us to be anywhere, anytime, but it's also reinforced by really rich partners such as World Vision, such as Habitat for Humanity, and others that come alongside and say, we can integrate this because we're talking with these parents on a regular basis, and it's even that much more impactful for those families.
So how do you deal with and this is just how my brain works, is like,
Mhm.
how do you deal with the recharging the batteries? Because sometimes,
Oh,
you're
right.
going into areas that don't have
Sure.
electricity.
Right. Never underestimate the resourcefulness of someone who has very little resources, right? There was a book that was written about financial literacy, and those that are at the very bottom, poorest, often have the most creative management systems, even though they look different than those with more means. And I find the same way, if you want to charge your phone, you're probably going to be able to figure out a way to do it, even in the most remote parts of sub-Saharan Africa. And it's everything from solar to some creativity of electric outlets, charging stations that they find. Um, Forever amazed how young people, and if you think of sub-Saharan Africa, over 50% are young people under the age of 18. They're creative. I love it. They have so many interesting resources and ideas to put forward, and just helping to figure out how we can untap that. So charging, of course, is an issue. I don't think it's the fundamental barrier. I think it's a part of the operational pie and puzzle we need to solve. But
So what would be the
I've seen
barrier? Yeah, what would be the
I think
biggest barrier that
barriers
you
is
find?
really trying to figure out how do you get that intrinsic motivation to get that reading as a habit. You
Mm.
know, we're we've moved the needle in the sector to get kids into school and to get them, to sit during the day, and attendance is going up and teachers are doing a great job. They've got a heavy load that they carry to teach reading. But now we've got this whole world, and COVID really exposed it. It can't be just the school, right? It's got to be really, it takes a village. It's got to be that whole community. And so a lot of the barrier is how do you reach those families to find the time, to make the time and understand that priority that we were just. And I think families are willing. They're definitely willing. They just need to understand that long-term impact that it's having. And education, Nicole, as you know, is a long-term process. It doesn't happen in a month. You don't generally see huge progress, but you do see progress in 6 months, 9 months, when suddenly your child is new vocabulary words and sharing a story, being able to recount a story to you that had been read. Those are big milestones when you're 3 to 5 or 3 to 6.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Yeah.
what is the process? So you said you work with partners. So let's think
Mhm.
about it like practically speaking. You get these, I mean, this
Sure.
is a nonprofit organization, so
Right.
these readers are being provided to them through the
Hmm.
partners. And so is it the partners that fund that, or do you get outside funding for that?
Yeah,
How
we
does
get
that work?
outside funding. Sometimes some of the partners offset some of our cost with us if they have other funding opportunities as well. I think as a nonprofit, everyone is collectively looking to figure out how we make the most of resources and how we leverage each other's good for greater impact. Maybe I'll give you two stories that are domestic to give you an example. One is Habitat for Humanity, who in Atlanta decided to integrate us, our BookSmart program, and into their sweat equity requirement of their families. So if you're going to be a homeowner with Habitat for Humanity, you have to put in 250 hours of sweat equity. That's usually like community service, attending some financial management classes. And they said, what if we integrated reading as a family as part of that? And we love the idea, quite innovative. I hadn't seen it done before. It's saying, my goodness, can we bolster every minute that the family reads together, which technology tells you, right? You can see how much has been read, would count toward their sweat equity. And we had some families that did a tremendous amount of reading over the summer, trying to mitigate summer learning loss with their children. We'd love to see a model like that expanded with other affordable housing organizations because it is just the beautiful intersection of something that they can do that further empowers them as a family unit. The child gets the benefit, the parents or caregiver gets the benefit, and it meets a requirement for their home ownership at the same time. So
I
that's
love
one
that.
example. Isn't that a great example?
Yeah,
I
yeah, very creative.
need more of that. Very creative, very creative. And then there's World Vision works through a whole array of different distribution models. So they work in after school clubs, in schools with Title I schools. They work with in-kind distribution where they're working with teachers to provide them resources. And so they've integrated us into how, as their education, part of their education offering to Title I teachers, to Title I parents, working with those Title I coordinators in schools, reaching parents. And there we're just part of their offering as they go in, being more of that first, I want to say first responder, first connect with families that they're working with. So, and they're utilizing us across the country. We had a great story where they're working in the Mexico-Texas border, where some migrants had come across and able to resource content in Spanish, and help them on their education journey as well, young children and their mothers. We had one said she'd never once thought of reading to her child before. And when she had been exposed to our BookSmart program, she realized, well, I can do this. I can help the teacher out. I can be involved. And she realized it was some sweet moments with her daughter to read, but had never once been exposed to that idea that she too could do it, and how transformative that was on a regular basis.
Well, you mentioned about confidence earlier and bringing the
Mhm.
confidence in even to the parents to actually realize that they can make a difference as
Mhm.
well. That's really, really powerful. And then of course there's the multi-generational impact of that. That is
For
awesome.
sure.
How do you select the curriculum and the types of books that
That's
you
great.
have?
Mhm. So great questions. A question we get a lot, Nicole, because it's so fundamental to ensuring that children read and parents want to read the books to their children. So we always look at content as twofold. One, is it a mirror for them themselves? They can recognize and they can relate to the protagonist and the antagonist in the story, and is it also a window? So we have the ability to curate collections from around the world. We work with over 400 publishers globally, so we can draw content from India in English and offer it here in the US. We can take content that's Spanish and offer it in Latin America. And the beauty is that we can do both. We can bring that content. If I'm in Atlanta here, I can see content that's published by a young author publisher, which is, stories created by Black and brown children. and their voices are celebrated, so kids recognize themselves. But they're also exposed to Ghanaian stories, and they're exposed to Hindi stories and Arabic stories that get translated. So we always look at it as it must be windows and it must be mirrors. And in the technical education realm, you've got curriculum, like real, how to teach reading, phonics, etc. And then you've got all this story reading, the supplemental reading that needs to happen. And that's our place. We celebrate that supplemental reading. We know that you need to read a lot of that to reinforce the curriculum. So we come around school systems and other formalized curriculum programs with supplemental reading materials.
So I had a lady on my show, I guess it was about a year and a half ago, maybe, Susie Harder, and she has an organization called Authorable. And it came out of a challenging situation where there was the campfires and the different fires in Northern California, and a lot of the families had lost their homes. And so she actually brought the kids together. She works with speech pathology. She's a speech pathologist, so she works with kids in that capacity. And so what she did is she created this opportunity where the kids can actually write a book together. And so they become like these junior authors, right? And the story is designed so that the book is designed so that they can actually make up their own story through it in the way that it's developed. So they get to vote on things and so forth. And I was just thinking about that as you were talking and thinking, wow, there's so many organizations out there that are doing great things. And part of the challenge is they're in silos, right? And
That's so true.
Together to resolve some of these big issues at the local level, but also national and international levels, kind of bringing that expertise, both, to it. So, very, very interesting. Well, how can people get involved with this? Let's say somebody's listening and saying, you know what, literacy is really important. My kids learn, and are able to read. I can read, all of that. We have that privilege, but we know that there are others that don't. How do they start to be involved in this to help support this initiative?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. I would say first and foremost, really start reading about the education situation in the United States, if you're local or you're global, wherever you're listening from, because I think everyone should start developing a passion for the future of young kids around education. And when you start seeing the numbers, it should alarm, and also recognize that it's a long-term commitment that families are making, organizations like WorldReader are making, states are making, governments are making for the health of those kids, but also for the health of their communities, their countries, etc. And as I started off, education offers better health, right? It offers more economic opportunity. We got a high shortage here in the US, right? It's very difficult to find the skills that you need. We don't educate our younger generation. We have even a larger crisis on our hands in terms of having the skills that we need. So 1, educate yourself, look around and see. 2, commit to reading to a kid. Everyone has a child in their life or can have a child in their life in which they read to. And I'd encourage you to read from Booksmart. Booksmart is available on any device. It's on iOS, Android, on your computer. Just type in bebooksmart.org and begin reading a book, and commit to reading 2 books a month to a child. Just starting that habit, because it will make such a difference. And of course, as a nonprofit, we're always looking for financial supporters as well as influencers that can open up new networks, new partners like you just mentioned, that we can collectively do more. That's so critical. We're constantly reminded as an organization, how do we also reach out and be a better partner? Because we have a huge challenge in the education sector, and we're going to have to do more together. We're going to have to think and break down some of our own barriers to be able to reach and address the needs that are out there today. So always looking for creative minds, creative ways to connect dots. So if you've got new organizations, if you're listening, that you think, gosh, would really value having our Booksmart program within their community outreach, please let us know. And if you're interested in connecting us to people that may be able to contribute as we expand our access to thousands of children around the globe, being able to access our BookSmart application, to be supported by the partners that know them well, we'd welcome that.
Now, is there an area of the world that, I mean, we assume that it's Africa, we assume that it's in different, certain places, but is that really true, or is it kind of across the board that this is an issue? Like you mentioned about getting to know some of the statistics. You probably
Sure.
know some of those statistics. Can
Yeah.
you share with us?
Yeah, it is across the board. Was it 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, the United States released a national assessment. It showed that we had a learning loss that put us back 2 decades to 1991. That's how much we lost
Wow.
in the United States for 9-year-olds. Someone said we really need a whole new social contract about how do we engage with these kids? How are we going to mitigate this? Our schools were not closed for 2 years. If we look in Peru, schools were closed for 2.5 years. Think of all that's lost, how many kids need to get caught up, how many kids are coming into the school system. So statistics of India, similarly, the statistics are pretty much the same. They're dire across the globe. You've got the war in Ukraine. Those kids are needing to learn, right? There's a lot going on, and while there's attention put to it, I think could be a million times more attention put to it because it's so foundational for the health of our societies going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of talk about, eradicating hunger and poverty and all these things. But when you
Mhm.
think about what's underneath all of that, that's what you were talking about
Correct.
earlier. It's this
Yeah.
idea of being educated so that you can rise up and that you
Mhm.
don't fall into the trap of, let's say, being trafficked because you're uneducated and you're desperate, or you don't have, the information
Sure.
and knowledge to protect yourself and be safe, put yourself in safe environments and so forth. So it's so, so important. We just recently also had another guest on this show, Dr. Kimberly Behrens, who
Mm.
talked about literacy and how they are teaching kids, even so the school system that we have,
Mhm.
how that gets to be transformed so that kids that are struggling are getting the help that they need and
Mhm.
not being just diagnosed with like dyslexia or ADHD
Sure.
or whatever, but saying, okay, why is it that there's so many kids that are struggling to learn in the
Mhm.
environment that we have? Maybe our environment needs to change. Maybe our approach needs to change. And I think that you're
That's a
part of
good
that
point.
solution,
Mhm.
in changing that model. And so it's very, very important. So thank you, Rebecca,
Yeah.
so much for
Yeah.
being
Thank
here
you,
and sharing a little
Nicole.
bit about, yeah, what you're doing. And
Yeah.
we want to get the word out, and these important
Wonderful.
issues. So
Wonderful.
yeah,
Thank you so much for helping us do that. You're
my
you're a
pleasure.
partner already, so I
There
appreciate
you
that.
go. My pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah.
And for our listeners, I would encourage you to go to worldreader.org. We'll make sure the links are in the show notes so that you can reach
Great.
out to Rebecca on LinkedIn and follow World Reader. And also there was some other references that Rebecca made. We'll make sure those are in the show notes as well, so that you can get connected, that you can help support what they're doing and what's really needed, no matter what country you're living in. We have listeners in over 140 countries. No matter
Fantastic.
what country you're listening from, uh, pretty much guaranteed that there is an issue with literacy that needs to be addressed, and we can all benefit from that. Can't hurt, that's for sure. And it certainly can make a huge difference. And
Mm.
so we encourage you to get involved. Leaders of transformation take action. So get involved, learn more about it if you're not aware. And I love what you said there about even just starting to read to a child. There's always children in your community, in your village that can
Mhm.
read. You don't have to go for some far off country to make a
No.
difference. You can actually make a difference really locally, with kids in your community, and with COVID and people falling behind. That's such a huge impact that you can make even on just on a local level. And
Tremendous.
so we encourage you to do that. We'd love to hear your stories. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com, reach out to us, share with us what you're up to and how you're making a difference in this area. And of course, you can follow us on social. We love to hear your stories. So we appreciate you and thank you again for being here. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.